Hello, I'm back. We're live January 4, 2023. This is a repeat live stream of an earlier live stream of the same topic. I find the topic very, very important and compelling. So I think I should better make another appearance because my earlier appearance was kind of choppy and busted. So January 4, our very first LS, technically. What are we having for today? Well, we're having some poetry, literary content. Why is this? Why is this? Hagbayon Channel is also a literary vlog. So right there, it's also a literary vlog. As per our content for this session, how do I read or how do I analyze Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening? Also, can we write poems inspired by other poems? Those are the... And I think we better have a channel ID first.
Nagkakaroon na naman ng pagtaas ng COVID-19 cases dito sa Pilipinas. Subalit ayon sa gobyerno, wala raw
Dahil ang pagsuyo ko ay multong haplos. Huli na akong lumampi ng 1,000 taon. Papailing ning paggamit ning folk beliefs related to the wingspan.
Nunglo or the kinabayo could very well be an articulation of this folk.
Then we go farther forward and we'll go to the false shield. At saka ito, syempre, ang ating sword. Kasi naman, ano po, kung talaga may sword po dito.
Alright, reading Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And of course, my answer poem in Filipino or Filipino/Tagalog language, being that I'm also a writer. That's our main topics for this particular session. All right. Our reading and analysis of Robert Frost's seminal work, canonical work, aside from his other great, poems, like, for example, The Road Not Taken. It's also a very important poem by Robert Frost. We got about Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And also sharing a latest literary output, which is actually my answer to Robert Frost's work. Okay. But first, we better play a video or share a video of Robert Frost himself reading his own poem. So let's give a warm of applause to the great poet Robert Frost.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Same here, still awake. By the way, I am here in Philippines, Southeast Asia, Southern Luzon, Bicol region. The Philippines was formerly occupied by the United States, so we consider the English language as one of our, you know, important languages, major languages, academic. It's actually our academic language, and even our laws. Our laws are actually written in English, yeah, mostly. All right, that was the great Robert Frost. 4 times he won the Pulitzer. Okay, and during his fourth uh, uh, victory, uh, he was up against our very own Jose Garcia Villa. And some people actually say that Villa should have won the Pulitzer that time. But it was given to Robert Frost, an American after all. Although Jose Garcia Villa already immigrated to the US at that time. So there, let's have a close reading analysis of Stopping by Woods. By the way, let me thank the channel Manufacturing Intellect. I got the short video clip of Robert Frost reciting from his own poem from that particular YouTube channel, Manufacturing Intellect. It's actually from an interview, of Robert Frost. I don't remember the name of the interviewer, but he was an Italian author. He was also a writer, and he visited Robert Frost in his farm and interviewed him. It was a wonderful interview. You should watch that interview. All right, let's begin our close reading of Stopping by Woods on a snowy evening by talking about some elements of poetry. What are some elements of poetry anyway? Uh, well, the persona. Okay, a poem or a poem must have a speaker. So we call that speaker the persona. Usually, it's an I persona. When we say I persona, that's first person, POV. So it's like me. I see you walking by the beach. O kaya in Tagalog, ah, ako ay narito sa harap mo ngayon. Something like that. I persona. The persona should be first person plural. So it's no longer an I persona, but a we persona. We. The persona is depicting, you know, plurality. Uh, the persona is not alone. So we. So it's another type of persona. And we also have poems having a second person point of view. So the persona or the speaker in the poem is actually talking either to the reader himself or herself, uh, or to an absent, lover or an absent person or a person present in the world of the poem or in the narrative or dramatic situation of the poem. The person is actually present in the poem. And there could even be a dialogue. There could even be a dialogue, like as if it's a screenplay or it's a stage play. So it's a you, second person. The poem could also have a third person point of view. some kind of a narrator, like in fiction. Uh, Someone is narrating the story, telling us about the various events happening in the story from step one to step 100. Who knows? Uh, the narrator could also be an observer. Uh, we call the persona the voice of the poem. So there, the first element, the persona or the voice of the poem. So when we read the poem, we ask ourselves, who is the persona? Who is the voice of the poem? According to Merli Alunan, the great poet Merli Alunan, a poem is a human utterance. So therefore, it's a manifestation of human intellect and emotions. However, there are some writers, poets, like myself, for example, most especially children's poetry writers. They employ, animals as persona. So they make animals speak. I have done that before. I think in one poem, I said, I uttered, Bawawaw o aking bayan, ikaw ay aking babantayan, ilong ko man ay masabugan. It's actually, I think, a Jonah, no? About patriotism or patriotism on the part of a canine dog. The canine dog is saying that he is willing to die for his country. You know, sniffing bombs and all that. So I made that particular poem once. So anyway, in general, poetry is a human utterance. However, we can make exceptions. So we ask, who is the persona in the poem? Another element is tone. If we have a voice or a persona in the poem, the voice or the persona is talking in a certain manner, on a certain tone. Is the persona trying to be funny? Is the persona trying to be ironic? Is the persona trying to be insulting? Is he sad? Is he angry? Listen to the tone. We should try to listen to the tone of the voice because it has a tone. You know, Another element, of course, imagery. In general, imagery would encompass metaphor already or simile. But a poem cannot there cannot be a poem without any concrete images. Images ought to be concrete, something you can smell, you can hold, something you can, uh, you know, palpate. So it's like it's real. It's something that you actually experience in the physical realm. That's imagery. Uh, it could be a series of images or just one image. The poet is just painting a picture or something, or maybe the poet is just describing one image from the to the next image. For example, the poet is describing three friends, you know, uh, one by one. No narrative really, but could be that there's a narrative. And according to national artist Edith Tiempo, in every poem, one must look for the ganap, for the narrative. A poem cannot be without a happening or a narrative, which I think I agree. Uh, it's impossible not to have a narrative, although it may not be so obvious. Another element is form. When we talk of form, we talk of uh, the nuances of language, like rhyme, the sound, the rhyming words. Also, meter, the beats per line. Uh, in Shakespearean sonnets, we usually have uh, 10, 10 beats per line. So during the olden times, rhyme and meter, served as a kind of a mnemonic device because at the time, poetry was oral tradition. poetry was not really being printed. Poetry was in essence something people recited or sang with some melody. But then later on, Caxton, invented the printing press and all that, and it led to modernism, and uh, we started to print things, most especially poetry. Um, um, yeah, as per rhyme, we could have internal rhymes. The rhyme could be within the line, in between the words, but not end rhymes. We could also have end rhymes. So those are some types of rhymes. We can even have alliteration. We can have discussion on various types of rhyming in some other future episode. There, internal or end rhymes. As per rhyme scheme can actually determine the form of the rhyme. Uh, you can have monorhyme, a, or you can have uh, sunuran in Tagalog, AABB. You can have salitan, ABAB. You can have paipli, ABBA. That's in Bicol poetics or in Filipino or Tagalog poetics, but it also applies in English poetry. And some poetic forms are actually defined by the rhyme scheme. Like we have the sonnet, the limerick, rondel, we have uh, villanelle, we have sestina, gazal. Uh, in Filipino or Tagalog, we have the tanaga, the jona, um, awit. In Bicol, we have the sik. Also in Filipino or Tagalog, we have the lit, dalit. Uh, among the mangyans, we have the ambahan. The rhyme scheme actually determines the form sometimes. And we can talk about that in some future live stream or episode. How about free verse? Is there such a thing as free verse? Well, according to Robert Frost himself, uh, writing in free verse is like playing tennis without a net. And can you do that? Can you play tennis without a net? Because that's not tennis. According to T.S. Eliot, writing free verse, it's not a good thing. He said uh, one must know how to count syllables if you rhymes, if or make rhymes if one wants to make a good job or something. That's C.S. Eliot and Frost. No verse is free. It may look like it's free verse, but there are internal rhyming inside the poem. Okay, because poetry is akin to music, so you can do that without internal or end rhymes, right? So there, poetry is akin to music. Poetry ought to be musical. That's why. So let's now delve into the poem itself. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Let's have the first line or the first stanza. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Okay, whose? When you say whose, it pertains to a kind of ownership. Ownership. Whose woods these are, I think I know. So there's the I persona here. So the poem starts with the first person, uh, singular, I persona, and the person being that. I am seeing some trees, forest, and I think I know who owns this woods or forest. Well, let's proceed. His house is in the village, though. His house. So he shifts to third person point of view. He, it's like depicting not himself, not you or a second person, but a third person. He, okay? First person, a third person, singular. He. Who is he? The he here seems to be the owner of the woods. His house is in the village, though, and according to the persona, the owner of the woods is not present in the dramatic situation. He's actually away. He is in the village. And because of this, let's proceed. He will not see me stopping here. Okay? He will not see me stopping here. So the he, apparently the owner, or maybe the master of the I persona, will not see him stopping there, right there at the woods. Why is this important? Okay? Why is this important? Why is the persona very much concerned about uh, the he? No? Apparently, the he could be the owner of the woods. Okay, let's proceed. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So, why is a persona concerned about this? Why is a persona concerned about uh, not getting seen by the he or by the owner of the woods, not getting seen that he was just standing there, letting the snow fill up, you know? So there's a first stanza. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Let's proceed to the second stanza. There. My little horse must think it queer. So there. Now the I persona is now talking about his horse, and his horse is just a little horse. It's just a small horse. Why a small horse? Why not a big horse? Why not a huge horse? Uh, and according to the I persona, his horse must be thinking that it's quite queer or it's quite odd or strange for them to be stopping in the middle of the woods at night on a snowy evening. And why is this? Why is this? Okay, let's proceed. My my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. So there, the I persona is thinking, oh, maybe my horse is wondering why I stop here, when in fact there is no farmhouse. And then the other question now is, uh, why? Why is it that the farmhouse is something that the horse ought to be considering in this situation? Okay. Uh, you know what? This is because it's really odd for them to be stopping without a farmhouse because the horse is a workhorse, right? It's supposed to be a farm animal, so the horse is used to working and uh, is accustomed to stopping at a farmhouse to load perhaps or unload farm products. And it is wondering why are they stopping? When there is no farmhouse, there is no farm products to load or unload, something like that. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. So there, I persona is thinking, maybe my horse is wondering why we stop here. There's no farmhouse. Instead, what we have here, the woods and frozen lake and the dark evening. In fact, it's the darkest evening of the year. Let's proceed with the third stanza. He gives his harness bells a shake. So according to the I persona, according to the one speaking in the poem, The horse gives his harness bells a shake. Horses have, a harness, a kind of a rope or a kind of a leather harness with small bells attached to it, so that somehow the rider of the horse or the horse itself could make some sound while galloping or while traveling. Now, according to the eye persona, the horse gives his harness bells a shake, to ask if there is some mistake. So there's now some kind of a narration. The eye persona is now narrating. He's saying that the horse, is making some sound, and there's also some kind of personification, because it's as if the horse is actually asking if there is some mistake. Why are we stopping here? This must be a mistake, master. So something like that. Uh, However, according to the persona, as we proceed, the only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. After all, a horse is a horse. So even if it tries to, intimate, or if it tries to, try to send some message to the owner, he cannot speak, and he cannot make himself heard like the way humans, can get their messages across. Instead, we have here sounds of nature, sounds of the wilderness, of easy wind and downy flake. Now, why is the horse uneasy? So that's our question now. So let's proceed. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. There, the persona now is saying that he finds the woods lovely. He likes it there. It's appealing to him. Maybe it's a place for him to rest. Maybe it's a place for him to relax and forget about work, or forget about the hustle and bustle of the city. So for him, the woods, even if it is dark, deep, and cold, the woods are lovely for him. However, he has promises to keep. So he says, but I have promises to keep. Meaning to say, he has obligations to keep, to keep, yeah, to respect. He has obligations. Maybe a contract, you know, of a place of work, maybe something like that. And that's why he has to go. Uh, and according to him, he has miles to go before he sleeps. Miles to go before he sleeps. So he even repeats those lines. Um, but what do we mean by sleep? What do we mean by sleep? Mm, maybe maybe is this death? Is this death? Let's talk about it later if this is death. But maybe for me, the persona is saying that he has miles to go before the working man in him sleeps. Okay, and the man in him who is aware of himself, who is aware of his rights as a worker, who is aware of his humanity, who is aware of his needs as a human, the need to rest, the need to observe beauty around him, to smell the flowers, so to speak. You know, he has miles to go before that person, before that side of him wakes up, and he has miles to go before that the workman in him sleeps and stops existing because of his situation as perhaps a laborer or a lowly, shall we call, or shall we say, a lowly tenant. Okay, and perhaps the owner of the woods is his landlord or the landowner or his employer. So there, that's it. We have here a poem that could be a little bit subversive, I think. No, that is why at one point uh, Robert Frost, when he met or when national artist Edith Tiempo of the Philippines, no, uh, of the Dumaguete National Writers Workshop fame, when Edith Tiempo and Robert Frost met, and Edith Tiempo asked Robert Frost about what the poet really wanted to say in this particular poem. Uh, Robert Frost only said uh, what? He only said, uh, what did he say? Easy does it. Yeah. He only said, easy does it. Easy does it. NA4L or National Artist for Literature, Edith Tiempo, was uh, was sent to the US to study. I think it was graduate school. I think it was at Iowa University, and at one instance, Robert Frost visited the university as a lecturer. Maybe Robert Frost talked about his poetics, and maybe he shared about his writing style, or maybe he talked about his poems, or maybe he recited poems. And one of the professors invited Robert Frost for dinner, and he also invited the graduate school students to also attend it. And among the graduate school students was Dr. Edith Tiempo, or Ma'am Edith Tiempo. And according to Ma'am Edith, he listened and listened and listened to Robert Frost, but starstruck as she was, she inched her she inched her way towards him until he brushed elbows with Robert Frost, and literally. And at one point she was at his feet, and so he and Robert Frost was sitting on a sofa, and Edith Tiempo was at his feet, sitting on the ground, and she asked him about this particular poem, about what he really meant. And Robert Frost said, easy does it, easy does it. And according to Edith Tiempo, it took him what? It took him, sorry, it took her 9 years to actually realize what Robert Frost was actually saying. So there, let us listen to Edith Tiempo. By the way, let's give credit to Rappler, because this particular clip, I got this from the YouTube channel of Rappler. Okay,
But
there.
I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
So I didn't say anything. It was when I was reading. I was reading the poem on the night here. I came to the last stanza and I told them there are changes of rhythm here, in the poem. And then I came to the end and I said, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And I wanted to ask him, why did you repeat those lines? No, but I did not dare ask him anymore after that. But all I could say was, I was telling the class, what induced the long, the rhythms there is the long vowels. Every vowel in that, in those lines, are long vowels. Everyone. And that is when it dawned on me. Miles to go before I sleep. Of course, what he is saying is the gray area again. When he says, all right, go to your duty, but do not go like a horse. You are a man. You must stop along the way and look at beautiful things. You must stop and be a man, not a horse. That's why he introduced the horse. You see, and the miles to go, how do we know he's telling us that? And then one bright student said, because of the rhythm. The words tell us to go to your duty, but the rhythm tells us to go. How do we go? How do we go? Not galloping.
So that's interesting to recall, and I'm pleased to recall it.
Miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. As we said earlier, we interpreted it as the person is saying that because of his particular situation or because of the situation of the society at that time or during his era, he actually had miles to go before he slept. You know, what do we mean by this? Uh, he actually had a lot to go before uh, the worker in him, the mechanized soul in him, as a victim of what we call as alienation due to modernity, due to his getting overwhelmed with technology, with industrialization, with capitalism. Uh, it was actually a little bit, you know, in despair or downtrodden because of that fact that for him it will take a long time before things will change, before he will sleep. The worker in him, the cog in the machine in him, sleeps, and the other person wakes up. And this person is a person who is aware of his humanity, who is aware of his rights, as we said, who is aware of beauty all around him, who is human, more human. Well, here for Dr. Edith Tiempo, he was sort of telling us that for her, the poem is telling us that, you know, uh, we ought to, go to work and do our obligations, but we must not do it like a horse. We must not work like a horse because we are not horses. We are humans. We have to stop from time to time, smell the flowers, look at beautiful sceneries around you or around us. So that's how we go. That's how we go through our lives. That's the interpretation of Mom Edith Tiempo of this poem. And according to her, it took 9 years to actually get it at that time. When he met with Robert Frost, the guy only told him, easy does it, easy does it. Easy does it. What does it mean? Easy does it is actually an idiom, an English medium, which actually means tread carefully, walk carefully, or walk with caution. You see, Robert Frost has Although, Robert Frost likes to think of himself as belonging to the class of poets who want who wants to be understood. Yes, very very tricky poems. This poem, for instance, or the road not taken. I hope we can talk about that particular poem next time. The road not taken is also a very tricky poem. It's very easy to what to misinterpret it. To misinterpret it. In fact, this poem is being interpreted, Stopping by Woods, is being interpreted as a poem about death or about suicide. Because we have here a person stopping by woods on a snowy evening and contemplating staying in those woods. But because of his obligations, he decides not to. He decides to gallop away. So it is like an intimation on suicide. This particular poem is being interpreted as a suicide poem or a poem about death or about a man uh, contemplating suicide. Is that a good interpretation or a bad interpretation? Well, according to Robert Frost himself, that's a terrible interpretation. In that video where he was being interviewed by that Italian author, he said that that's a terrible interpretation. He thinks it's a bad interpretation because he likes to think of himself as an optimist in the sense that he likes to think that the past, if he looks back at his past or at human history, he likes to be optimistic about it, that the past should never be changed because it's the way it should have been. Same with the present and same with the future. So he's actually an optimistic person. So he thinks uh, interpreting this poem as a poem about death or about suicide is terrible. But is this particular interpretation bad? I think, in my opinion, it's not because, for one, the author is dead. I believe in the philosophy that the author is dead. Once you write a poem and you publish it and you let strangers read it, you can no longer you can no longer stop the readers from interpreting it their own way, and you can no longer argue against said interpretations. You can no longer dispute. You can no longer defend yourself or defend the poem. Once it meets the readers, you're gone. Author is immaterial. Author is dead, so to speak. So that's why. And even if Robert Frost is not in agreement with the interpretation that this particular poem is about death, what can he do? He cannot do anything about it. After all, the author is dead, as we said. And I think, on a more serious note, not to say that the previous point was not serious, I think it's also a nice interpretation in the light of what? In the light of our society right now, in the light of mental health. So many people contemplating suicide, etc. So it's nice to have a poem like this to look at, to look back to, and you know absorb, so that you will become the person who will choose life over death. You will become the person who will choose to fight it off, to go on and face your obligations, which is to live your life to the fullest, which is our greatest obligation actually with the universe. So I think that's also a good interpretation. However, according to Mom Edith Tiempo, this poem is telling us to relax a little. Let's not get affected by our surroundings, by the stress, and by you know, the fast-paced lifestyle nowadays. That's the way he sees it. But for me, I see it as a subversive poem. The persona here is saying that uh, uh, situation is that bad. That there's miles for him to travel before uh, the human in him wakes up, and the slave in him, the worker in him, the eternal worker, the eternal slave in him sleeps. Okay, and he goes to the forest when the workman in him sleeps, and the new man wakes up and sees the beauty of the forest. I think that's a very, very subversive reading. That is why I think Robert Frost was saying, or was telling Mom Edith Tiempo to easy does it. Easy does it. Um, why do I have this particular reading? You know what? In 1923, when this particular poem was published, this was part of New Hampshire. New Hampshire. Did I pronounce it properly? This was part of the first, I think the first collection of poetry of Robert Frost, published in 1923. The predominant literary movement at that time was modernism, and after World War One, modernism had themes bordering on alienation, man versus machine, man versus industry, man versus capitalism, man versus mechanism, man versus the factories, man versus work. Man, the man being considered as labor only, not an individual, not a person with a soul, and not a person with feelings, but a person who is expected to produce a product, like a machine. So the humanity of the person is gone. Okay, modernism, alienation. That's why I have this particular interpretation, because with the alienation, with this particular situation, the self or the soul is diffused, or the self is diminished. Uh, the self is diminished in all of this modernity, and the self will no longer have time to smell the flowers, so to speak. You see, modernism is logocentric. Okay, uh, it is said that modernism started when Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." When Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," it was actually the very first manifestation of modernism, because now importance shifted to the I, to the thinking I. Okay, vis-a-vis or versus the previous prevailing philosophy or notion during the Middle Ages, which was theocentrism. What the church believed to be true was the truth. And previously, it was worse, cosmocentrism. So there, with all this sort of different superstitious beliefs, etc. Now, with modernism, we have rationality. Okay, we have uh, philosophy that is anchored on logic, on science, etc. And later on, it was replaced by post-modernism, post-structuralism, because we have this particular ideas, some other time. perhaps during camping or during hiking. All right. So there, the poem is telling us to be human, to take the power back, to rage against the machine, so to speak. Okay, to take your time, smell the flowers. So I actually came up with an answer poem to this, which brings the question. Uh, which brings us to the question: can we write poems inspired by other poems? Okay, can we write poems inspired by other poems? Yes, we can because people have been doing it. Earlier poets have been doing it. We call it mimic poems. Mimic poems. Okay, we have some guests. Before we proceed, thank you, Melody, Weatherby, for passing by. I hope you can watch this live stream after I upload it. We have world news. Sabi niya, first time ko ini madangog. We have also Pia and Recent's channel. Atabunon ang LS mo. Okay, early in the morning. Okay, may book ba siyang sinulat o gabos lang poems? Robert Frost was primarily a poet. I think also wrote some essays. By the way, Robert Frost was very, very political. His father was very political, and so was he. And that's why I think this particular poem also is a political poem. It's not just about a person, saying that he ought to smell the flowers. It is about a person saying that he ought to rebel against the system or something like that. Which brings us to my mimic poem or my answer poem. I came up with this last January. It's freshly, it's a freshly written poem. It's in Tagalog or Filipino. I write in English, Tagalog/Filipino. I also write in Bicol, Bicol Naga, and Bicol Iriganon. But you know what? Poems come to me in different languages. I could hear the poem in my head, and I could determine what language to use at the onset. At this time, it's really a Filipino or Tagalog, and you know what? It's good. It's actually uh, nice that way because I can never match Robert Frost in English because after all, he's one of the most celebrated American poets. And you know what? When we write in English, we are not really writing English as Filipinos. We are writing from English. We are borrowing English as a landscape. That is why when we write in English, we ought to make sure that our written works in English are so Filipino, because we can never write, we can never match the Americans, we can never match the British or any other you know, English speaking nation for that matter in writing in English because English is not our language. English is their language. Although according to Eagleton, a thinker, there are so many Englishes. So there, given that fact, if we write in English, we must write as Filipinos writing in English. So we must inject our culture, our historical experience, our context in the English language. Anyway, enough of my sermon. Let's go to my poem, my answer poem, my mimic poem. It's called Sa Iyong Paghinto. So let me share it. sa iyong paghinto. Pagkatapos ng Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening ni Robert Frost. Tinakda ng simoy ang iyong paghinto. Kung kaya, Ginoo, di mo ko binigo. Sapagkat nayon ko'y malapit, malayo. Pagmamasdan kitang likas, buong buo. Ang kabayo mo nga'y tila alumpihit. Walang kubo rito, o kaya kamalig. Ang narito'y ako, ang gubat, ang lamig. Mapagkubling dilim at lawang tahimik. Kaya't ang kabayo ay umiling-iling. Kampana't pamingkaw ay pinataginting. Tila nagtatanong, may nais wikain. Dahon ay nahulog, sumipol ang hangin. Kaya't bantulot man ikaw ay humayo. Kayo ng kabayo'y tumakbong obrero. Subalit Ginoo, pakatandaan mo, pag ikaw nahapo, ang gubat narito. Pag ikaw nahapo, ang gubat narito. Sa iyong paghinto. Alright, that's my answer poem. You know, I'm a hiker, and when I go to the woods or the forest, I sometimes feel that someone is watching me. That's why I came up with that poem. Alright, Jason here for the Hagbayon Channel and TMS Talks. Let us conclude this particular session. How are you? Please comment down below. And let me thank Melody, Weatherby, World News, Pia, and Recent's channel, and also those who joined me earlier during the first run of this live stream. It so happened that internet wasn't so good earlier. That's why I had to do this again. Talking about passion, you know. Poetry is my passion. Alright. Thanks for watching. And remember, the pen is mightier with the sword and some poems.